All right, so we're going to start off with opening up our other one here, Page Transitions. This is where we left off last time. We did one of these, and then you guys went ahead and played with different page transitions, going from left to right, up to down, playing with scale, playing with rotation. I don't like to give out every single thing. I like you guys to explore that, and then based on what you found, I want to show some of those things that other people have found. Because one of the biggest things you'll find is that the stuff I show in this class is very limited to what we do in this class. Out in the real world, there's so many other things that you can do inside of After Effects, okay? So a lot of your work is spent playing, okay? And it literally is. It's just fun playing stuff inside of After Effects. So one of the things that people did was they wanted to create this kind of rolling thing. So if I do any kind of rotation, the first thing I do is I move my pivot to where I want to start rotating from. Come on, right? So I want to rotate from that corner. So I'm going to start it off screen. I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to go up however many frames, and then reset that to 0. So boop, there it is. Okay, so that's no big deal. Okay, we've done pretty much that when we did our title one. Now, if I wanted to then have it rotate from a different corner, how do we do that? So you guys already kind of figured out the two ways. One of them is I could duplicate this. I could cut this layer and then delete the keyframes. And then on the second layer, which is there, I move my pivot to the other side. Okay, and then I just set a keyframe, go up a little bit, and then set a keyframe for it to go out. Now, because I have an overlap, this bottom one also needs to be cut. Okay, so this is what we get. Boop, boop. Okay, so that is a totally acceptable way to do that. The only issue with doing that is that I have two layers now that are basically the same thing. Right? So I'm going to delete this top one, make this big again. And what I'm going to do is I can have multiple pivot points. Every time I parent something, I create a new pivot point, okay? And the way that we parent it is I'm going to go to Layer New and create a null object. A null is just a nothing object, okay? It's exactly what it's meant for. This is what it looks like. It doesn't render, there's no color to it, it's just like a blank object. If I move this to the top corner, and I can use my control key to snap it, I can tell this solid to follow the movement of that item, okay? So I go under the parenting stuff here, and I say, okay, pale green solid, you will be parented to null 1. So anytime I move null 1, it will move the entire thing. So what I'm going to do is animate one property like this, so it goes slam down. Then I'm going to go to my null and rotate the null so it does the other part of it. Okay, so now it's the same thing. Now I only have one solid there, all right? So there's two ways to do it. Both ways are acceptable. It's just a matter of how you want to set it up, okay? You could even have, in some cases, you could have another null, let's say down here, and then it would rotate a different way, or scaling from a different point. Okay, so don't limit yourself to only looking at the one area or the one spot to scale from. You can look at it from multiple spots. Okay, so I guess I'll leave that. All right, so here was another one. So I'm going to grab my layer and make another solid. And so somebody wanted something else like this. So they wanted to scale from this bottom corner here. There we go. So I'm going to reset this to 0, not click enter. There we go. So 0, it's going to come up about that much and go there. Okay, now they wanted to then scale from this corner. We know from the 2 seconds ago I could put a null up there, new pivot point, scale to that corner. Okay, but pay attention to the motion of this. Okay, is this any different than if I were to have grabbed this solid and just moved it off screen? Right? What we're seeing is pretty much exactly the same thing. Like whether I scaled that or whether I positioned it, it's pretty much the same exact movement. It's just, you know, obviously it's less complex. So just pay attention to that kind of thing too. See if you can get it another way. Now, if there was a texture on this, there would be a huge difference in what these look like. So let me just set a position keyframe. Let me rewind this to the beginning and set a position keyframe down here. Okay, so now that looks like that. And what I'm going to do is on each of these items, I'm going to put an effect. Under Generate, at some point go through all the menus and just kind of look around and see what they are. Make a solid and just start dragging stuff on it and playing with it. I'm going to create a checkerboard. Okay, so each of these has a checkerboard. So the first one, there's the animation for that. Let me make this smaller with slider. Make sure I click on the right one. That helps. Make it bigger. Cool. Okay. So looking at this animation, you can see that the squares are squares the entire time. Now if I go to the other one, which scales, make those bigger again, you can see that that one we actually do see the scaling up. So in this case, there would be a specific reason of why we would use one over the other. If I had a texture on it and I wanted the texture not to scale, I would use position. If I'm fine with it scaling, then I would use scale. Okay? Cool. I'll delete that. I can actually delete those. I don't need that. All right. So those were a few of the things that came up, the parenting and then the other one. All right. So for this project, every one that we create, every new composition, I want to create every new transition, I want to create a brand new composition. Eventually what's going to happen is we're going to have a piece of our artwork. So like our next assignment, let's say, is Angry Birds. We're going to have our title sequence, a page transition, and then Angry Bird. So I want to be able to very quickly jump into here, find a transition that I like and copy it, and then drop it into the Angry Bird assignment. Okay? Because all of these are layers, there's no linking. There's nothing outside of this program that links to it. It's just like it's right there. Okay? So very easy, I can copy it and paste it. When we do our demo reel, we will have our nameplate. We will have a transition. We will have piece 1, a transition, piece 2, a transition, piece 3. So we want to make sure that we have these page transitions like ready to go. Okay? So every single new transition, I'm going to make a new composition. And remember, you can write down the settings for this because for pretty much everything we're doing for page transitions, that's going to be exactly the same. For other assignments, the only thing that's really going to change is that duration. Okay? The duration is the only thing that's going to change for project to project. So with this one, I'm going to call this one radial transition. Okay. So with my radial transition, I don't have, if I make a new solid, that solid is not circle, right? Circular. Okay, so I can't use that. So underneath the layer is this. Okay, these are all shapes, and what these are basically are little vector pieces of artwork that we can use. And the cool thing about them is that we can animate all the pieces of it. So a kindergartner will be able to figure this out, so hopefully you guys can too. Which one should I use for a circular transition? The ellipse, not the circle. It's not a circle yet until it's uniform. All right. So I can do this, click and drag, and that's an ellipse. If I hold shift, that's a circle. Okay? If you remember from Photoshop class, holding the space bar while you're dragging something allows you to move it around, right? So just like that, it allows us to move it around. Holding down the Alt key drags it from the center. Not in this program, of course. You'd have to drag the Control key, and then it does it. Okay? And so then I get a shape. Now this shape has a fill to it, and it has a stroke. So I'm going to pick a fill that I can actually see, so that's good. And then I'm going to drag the stroke up. Okay, so now I have some sort of shape that I can animate. Now if I was to rotate this, do you see where it's rotating from? Yep, from this spot right here. So very easily, I could hit Y, and then I could drag that over and center it right there. And then I could center this by also hitting Control, I think, or bringing up my guides and trying to snap it, right? Holding Shift and Control. There we go, right there. Okay, so that's a lot of work for me to center the circle and to get the pivot in the right spot. So I'm going to delete that. That's typically I never do it that way by dragging it on because it just creates it in a random spot and the pivot's like off to the side. If I double click this ellipse tool, it automatically drops one in right at the center, automatically resized to my document, okay? So that's the preferred method of doing that. That way I don't have to do extra work, okay? Just double click that shape, and then it should pop it right in there. Now the only thing that it does do is it makes an ellipse, it doesn't make a circle. So I need to make it a circle, so I'm going to open up the ellipse tool. I'm going to open up the ellipse path. Yep, there it is. And you'll see that it says 960 by 540 here, okay? So because this is not just a solid, this is actually a shape, I have more options. So I have the contents, which is the ellipse path, the stroke, the fill, and then a transform ellipse. Okay, so there's like a lot more stuff involved in this one because we have more things going on. So I'm going to make this uniform, so I'm going to turn off my keychain and then turn on, or type 540 there. Perfect. Okay, so I double click the ellipse, I opened up the ellipse path, went to the size, and then just made sure that both of these numbers were exactly the same. Now I have a perfect circle, no longer just an ellipse. Okay? Now you'll see that this shape layer has several spots where we can tweak the position. So it has this spot here, which is position. If I open up the transform, there's another position. And if I open up the other transform, there is another position. Okay? So that part is going to confuse you because there's so many different spots for us to do the same thing. Now, the reason that there are several spots is because we have one shape here. We can add multiple shapes into this one layer, right? So let's say that I'm making a gear and I wanted to make a circle and then I want to have these little notches come out of it, okay? I can make each one of those little notches plus the circle plus the cutout in the middle all in one shape layer. It's a lot easier to go into Illustrator and draw that and then just bring it in, but you can do it inside of After Effects, okay? So typically I will go into After Effects. It's a lot easier. Or into Illustrator. So just be aware that they exist. All right. So under stroke, there's also more options than are up here than just like what is the stroke size. You can go through and you can specify, obviously the color of the stroke is up there, the size of the stroke. You can specify the opacity of the stroke. You can choose the kind of stroke that's on there. So right now, it's just a solid stroke, just all the way around. If you click on dashes, you can assume what that's going to do. It's going to create dashes. And if you look at a lot of these types of things, you'll see this, just even that effect on top of one of these, people will use. And you can specify the size of the dashes or the offset of the dashes so you can actually have it move. One of our assignments that we do, we have a camera tracking assignment where we're in a supermarket and we make like a little cutout thing and we animate this little offset, and that's what makes it look like you're cutting out a coupon or something, like it's highlighting it, okay? Or like a poker chip, yeah. You can change the caps to rounded, you can change the caps to, you know, projecting caps, whatever. You can also go up here. Now this is what threw me at first when I started this. So if I click on this, it lets me change the color, that's no big deal. But I can even click on the word fill and then choose what kind of item I'm doing there. So I can say no fill, a solid, a linear gradient, or a radial gradient. Okay? So in that one color, I can choose all those different options. And then that will open up more options down here. All right? Cool. So I'm going to delete that again. Especially when you guys first start off, don't be afraid to delete stuff. Don't be afraid to try things. The world blurs. So it's either a book I'm reading or something I listen to on YouTube. One of those things. They were talking about people when they're learning. When you're a kid and you're learning something, you have no problem making mistakes because as a kid, that's how you learn. You want to walk, you have to try to stand up and you fall down and you fall down and you fall down and eventually you don't and you start walking. So as adults, we've kind of conditioned not to do that, not to make mistakes. So we're afraid to just click buttons because we don't know what they're going to do because our parents yelled at us for 18 years not to do something. So play around. You have to play around with this stuff, okay? So delete stuff, make new stuff, play for hours. All right, so I have my ellipse, This is a 540 by 540 circle. And what I want to do is I'm not going to have a fill on this, so I'm going to get rid of my fill. And I'm going to have a huge stroke on it, that big. Okay, so the stroke is actually going to fill the entire screen. What I want to do is I want to animate the stroke coming on. That's what those effects are. Hey. All right, so all those effects are based off of having that stroke animate, and that's what does it. Now, so we can see this better, I'm actually going to take this stroke down. Eventually, it'll be that size, though, okay? So I'm going to keep it like this just so we can see it, and then you'll be able to see how this works, and then we can just change the size. All right, so over here, there's an add, okay? Again, you don't see these things unless you're like looking around and just playing with tools. So one of these is trim path, okay? So this is going to allow me to trim this path. So the second I click add here, and I click trim path, in my shape layer, I get a new trim path option. So now I can open up the trim path, and then I can play with the start, the end, or the offset, okay? All of these will typically have start, end, or offset. So if I go to the start and I drag it, you can see what it does. It just does that. If I go to the end and drag it, it'll do the opposite direction. And if I do offset, it'll do that. Okay? So sometimes you'll animate one of these features, start or end. Sometimes you'll animate start, end, and offset all at the same time because it creates these really cool effects. Like if you look at the Google logo, how it like swipes on, that kind of thing, like that is very similar to what you could create with all three of those. All right, so I'm going to start this at, which way do I want to go? That way. Okay, so I want this to go clockwise like this. So I'm going to start my end at 0. I'm going to go up to 7 frames or 8 frames, whatever, and then dial it on. So now I have this. That's it. Okay. Now in order to do the big screen that they have in theirs, I just take the stroke size up to an enormous amount. Oops. Like that big. Now if I watch it, it does the entire screen. Okay? So take a minute. All right, so this is what we have so far. All right, so look at this here. Do you see how I have like a half a pie on one side and then whatever, a wedge on the other side? Any guesses why that's happening? What was that? If I take, when did it happen? It's because my stroke weight is so far up. See, it's going past it. Okay. That's pretty nifty. So you, right, the stroke weight is bigger than the circle. So typically you don't want that to happen. Sometimes you may, sometimes you may not. Okay, but ideally you don't. So I remember the size of mine was 540 by 540. So if I set my stroke weight to 540, that will give me a perfect circle weight. Okay, so it's like exactly from the center outward. You'll notice that there's also a little piece right here that is not covered by anything. Now I don't want to take the stroke weight up anymore to cover that, so one option I could do is just scale it. Okay, so if I just hit the S for scaling and just put it probably at like 105, it should be plenty. Okay, it'll cover up that little corner there.
And you determined the stroke size by how?
Our document height is 540, right? So that's the biggest that thing can be because that's how big that circle is. Now, notice this too. Let me turn this off for a second. Let me double click this and pull that up. Oops, that's way too much. Okay. So you see the evenness of this line here and that weight there. Like this is an even stroke going all the way around. If I grab this and I push that in, is it even anymore? No. Okay. When we scale that layer, we scale that shape itself, it's different than changing the actual size of it, okay? So anytime we're changing the size of these, we want to make sure we go to the ellipse, we go to the ellipse path, and then we choose that size there. That way it stays uniform going all the way around. And then if there is, for instance, that we do want to change the thickness, then we do that on our own some other way, okay? Cool. All right, so now this is perfect. Boop, just does that. Okay. Now if we add motion blur to this, well, let me hit my keyframes here real quick. Let me add easy ease to this. Let me go to my graph editor and tweak this. The direction is based on which one you've chosen. So I chose to animate the end, so it animates one direction. If you chose start, it would do the other direction. Now you could get away with going to your scale and negative scaling in one direction. Okay, so I uncheck this, I make my scale -105, and now it should go the opposite direction. Okay, because it's basically like the animation was going this way, I flipped it, now it's going the other way. Okay, so that's a possibility too if you wanted to cheat it like that. So we could add motion blur to this too, and we'll get a nice little motion blur like effect. Remember, because we have motion blur on our very first frame, that we do get this like fanning already at the start of it. So we may want to offset our keyframes just like one frame from the start. Okay? Now does anyone know how I got just those keyframes up and nothing else? You do know or you want to know? You do know? Oh my God. You want to know how. Okay, on your hotkey sheet, one of them was show animated properties. So if I hit U, which is that keyframe, it will show me any property that has keyframes. So the great thing about that is, let's say I animated position, scale, this offset, that offset, 17 other things. Instead of me opening up all of those different things, I hit U, and it just pops open all those 17 and just those 17, okay? Now if I hit UU, what does that do? Ha 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 ha.
Shows your modified properties.
Right, shows our modified properties. So anything that is not default, that's what it's showing us. So I changed the size, so it's showing me the size. I changed the trim path, it's obviously showing me the trim path. I changed the stroke width and the color, it's showing me that. And I changed the scale, it's showing me that. Okay, so if you're ever concerned about what did I change on this thing, hit U twice and it'll pop open everything that you've changed. Okay, and then I can just hit U and then it comes back to just that. Okay, sweet. So from here, the process would be exactly the same for animating, just like we did before. I can duplicate it several times. I can offset it several times. And then I can go ahead and change a color. Now this one's easier to change a color because the color is still right here. It's not Control-Shift-Y. We don't have to go to any menus. It's just right there, and then we just pick a different color. And then I click the next one. I click that. Wait a minute, I think I went the wrong direction. This is white. Yep, I did go the wrong direction. Let's read later. And that one's good there. This one will be a smidge darker. And then that one will be all the way. Okay, so without the motion blur, you can see all the colors. And then with motion blur, it's a nice little fanning of colors right at the beginning and then throughout. Okay, now this is also a good way too, like for what we're doing, we're animating, like I said, nothing on the screen, something on the screen, then going back to nothing on the screen. You could animate this going from one piece to another one. So let's say that my Angry Birds that I'm going to do, I start off with a blue sky and then it pans down and shows my Angry Bird. So I could do a transition like this to blue, transition to the Angry Bird one, which is the same blue, and then just go right into that. Okay, so sometimes you can do those kinds of transitions too. For this, we're just going to keep it in and out the same thing. Okay. So that's awesome. So you could do that as well. We could also go the other direction with this too. So if I go, I'm going to make a new composition. I'm going to make another shape there. I'm going to go back to my ellipse, go to the ellipse path. Change that to 540. I'm going to make my stroke also 540. I can't see it because it's black, so I will change the color to white. And then I'm going to use my scale to animate this one. So I'm going to scale it from 0 to 105. Oops. Okay, so I get that. I'll do my ease, play in the graph editor. And now I can do the same thing as I did before, which is just duplicate and then change my colors. And then finally, blank. There we go. Oops. And offset. Don't forget offset. All right. Add some motion blur on. And there's my transition in. And then I would do the same thing we did last time, which is then animate it going outward, right? Now here's a trick too. So before what we did is we would animate it on the one and then paste it for the other ones. All of these are going to animate the exact same way. They're all going to start off at 0, go to 105, stay at 105 for a bit, and then go back to 0, right? That's their scales. So if I go up here and I just set a keyframe for all of these, oops, and then I scoot up a little bit, and then I set them all to 0. Oops, that's not 0. Now I have the keyframes there. Now it's just a matter of me going through and then just offsetting these again. So instead of me deleting everything, recoloring everything, and then doing this, I can just do it right there. And then it goes away. And that should obviously be a bit closer like that. Sweet. So we start off with nothing, we get our stuff, and then we go back. Now just so you can see, I'm going to turn on my transparency so you can see that it goes to something and then it goes away. Because ideally, like I said before, we're going to have an item underneath this. In order to have an item underneath this, we have to have that transparency there. Okay? So take a few minutes and animate this one coming in like this, and animate this one doing that. All right, you can continue playing after as well. Okay, so fun stuff. All right, now Austin brought up a good suggestion. He said, what if we had this kind of effect? Oops, on all these. What if we had this kind of effect, but we had it like all over the screen, right? So because this is a animated with just the scale of this, I could just duplicate this. Let's say scoot it down, and let's say move it over here. Notice when After Effects duplicates layers, that it kind of staggers them inside the group, right? So it's like automatically duplicates them, but now there's like every other one is a new layer. Typically when I do that, I just kind of move them to the top, so those are all grouped together, okay? So now if I hit play, right, so now I have that same effect. So let's do it again, and then do that. Scoot these down. Scoot that over here. Wow, it's amazing. I'm go blind. Now, that is one way to do it, just like before. That is an acceptable way to do it. But what happens if we want that same effect, but now I want to change the colors on all of those? That's a lot of clicking for me to do, right? So this is a composition. A composition is basically a group of stuff just put together. So who's to say that I couldn't just group that and then just duplicate that group over and over and over again and just reposition it, okay? So that is something we can do. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name my composition because I never named this. And I'm going to call this one circle scale. That's good. And I'm going to pre-compose these. So I'm going to take all of these things here, all those layers, I'm going to right click and I'm going to say pre-compose, or I'm going to hit Control-Shift-C. I'm going to call this one circle scale. Oops. You can call it a group, you can call it a comp, you can call it whatever you want. As long as you know what it's called and somebody else going to your station will know what it's called, that's what I'm going to do. Sometimes this leave attributes will be here, sometimes it won't. In this case, it's not available, so I'm fine. But typically, you'd want to move all your attributes to the new comp. Okay, so once I do that, you'll see that that stuff is now linked to this one area. Okay. So now I can just take that one layer and duplicate it and scoot it over and duplicate it and scoot it over and duplicate it and scoot it over, and then offset these into different spots. Let me offset them in a different direction. Here, there, let's say there. Okay, so what do we notice about this?
It kind of has edges to it.
It does have edges to it, right? So After Effects is remembering that composition is automatically sized to that dimension. So I have to tell After Effects to ignore that feature. So if I look at this button right here, this button next to Shy Guy and next to this slanty line is continuously rasterized. And what it means is ignore the size of that composition and just use the shapes. So if I click that, now they're full sized and now they're all cool. So I play and then they fit. Now that can screw up stuff later down the line, so we have to be aware of that at the start of this, not later on. Now the original issue was, okay, what if I want to change the colors of this? I don't want to have to pick a bunch of things. So remember before I went up to Effect and I showed you the color correction and hue and saturation, right? Okay, so what if I did that again, hue and saturation. Let me see where this one's on screen. Right there, okay. And then I went to Colorize, and then I chose a color like that. Gorgeous. Okay, now I can copy that hue and saturation and paste it onto the next one. There we go. And change its color. And then go down to this one and paste it and change its color. And then go down to the next one and paste it and then change its color. Okay, so very easily I've taken that one effect and I've made it reusable over and over and over again simply by pre-composing it. This is something, a concept we will do literally throughout the rest of the class. We will be pre-composing stuff over and over and over again. When you look at, I really have to stop closing windows. Sweet. So very easily, boop, we can do that. Now, the cool thing about doing this too, let's say that I don't like my animation anymore and I want to go back and tweak that animation. Before, I would have to delete all those other layers, fix my animation, redo it to all the layers again, and then rechange my colors. With this, when it's pre-composed, we can go into that composition still and tweak that animation, okay? So if I just double click any one of these, because they're all the same, it'll take me into that original animation, okay? This is exactly what it was right before I pre-composed it. So I could say, okay, well maybe I don't want, maybe I don't like how fast it's going. So I'm going to go to my graph editor for this. And I'm going to change my speed graph to go the other way. Whoops. And for whatever reason, it's like super tiny right there and I can't get in. There we go. There it is. Okay. And then I'm going to grab this side. Come on. Their zooming tool is very clunky. It's hard to get in there. There we go. Okay. All right. So now what I should have is it should go slow, fast, hold, and then slow, fast again. Okay. So this one. So it's subtle, but it's there. I jump back to my circle scale, and then any changes I just did now update here. Okay. So very cool that we can do stuff like that. We can also alter things too. Like if this was a different kind of transition, not just like this one, because we can do this really to any of our transitions. That's nothing. Like this one here, how it comes from left to right. I could pre-compose this and then just negative scale it or rotate it, and now it'll come in from the other way. Or I can rotate it and move it up, and now it'll come straight down. Okay? Now some of these you can't do, like this one here, I would have been able just to grab these and move them, and that's not a huge issue because I'm not animating the positional properties of it, right? So if I put that, let's say here, the animation's still the same as far as like what they're doing. They're just doing it over there now. But if I went to something like this whole animation is based off of them moving off screen and then moving onto screen. So if I were to grab these and just move them, my animation would then follow that movement. So it goes here, and then it shoots up for whatever reason. Okay? So this one, I really can't just move it. This one, I would definitely need to pre-compose it. Sliding left. And now I could take this transition and move it, rotate it. I could even scale it. Make sure it's on screen. That makes more sense. Right? And so now, whatever direction I want, there it is. I want this to come in at an angle. Make sure it's still on screen. Scaled up. There we go. And then it goes away. Okay? So pre-composing is a very powerful tool, allowing us to group stuff together. You consider it grouping, but it's basically just making another composition. Amazing. All right. So that's that one. All right. Uh-huh. You can put it in null too instead of pre-composing. It's an excellent suggestion. So like let's say on this one, yep, I guess so. I'm going to undo before I pre-composed it. So if I were to make a null, and then I took all of these items here, I don't need the adjustment layer, but I took all the other items and I parented them to the null, I could still take the null and move that around and still rotate that, and my animation would follow it. It would just be a matter of then duplicating it, then we still have all those layers. So again, it's another option. It's something that we would consider based on whatever else we're doing with it. Awesome. All right. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to make another new composition. So make another new composition and call this circle blip. Verify, now that we've gone through a couple of these, that our frame rate is 30 frames a second and that our duration is 300. Okay? So just verify we're at 960 by 540, 30 frames a second, 3 seconds. It's called circle blip. Cool. When you're done, hit OK. If you want to triple check verify it, when you've created that new comp, on the far right of your composition, it should say 300, not 3000 or 500. Okay? So what we're going to do now is you're going to animate the an ellipse scaling. So watch mine first, and then you will see what yours is going to do. Make sure this is white so I can see it. There we go. All right, so that looks good. So I've given it a not super thin, not super thick weight. I'm going to go to my scale. I'm going to put this at 0. I'm going to go up so many frames, and I'm going to scale it. I don't want it to hit the edges. So however far that is, like right about there, that's perfect. Then I'm going to go to my graph, after I easies. And I think I want the speed to be on the end of this. So now we have this. Cool. Right? So do that. All right, so what we're going to be creating here is something that we could use in addition to our page transitions, just to add some sort of interest to them, okay? So what essentially we want to create is like a bubble popping, just like disappearing, right? So I want to get rid of this thing. Now I could, it probably would be possible if I were to, let's just try this and see, if I animated the stroke width also, going from 23 to 0, just see what that would give us. Yeah, so it gives us something like that, okay? So that's an option. What we want to do is something different. We're going to duplicate that shape layer. So duplicate your shape layer. Offset it like 2 frames. And then what we should get is 2 blips. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to use my second blip as a way to cut out the first blip. Okay? So this will become more important later on, but this is just the theory part of this. So this menu right here, these options, we can change what those are based on what we are trying to do inside of our scene. Down here at the bottom, there's 3 icons here. There's this toggle switches and modes there. So we want to hit toggle switches and modes. Right here at the bottom of your timeline. Okay. So what that does is it allows us to get different options. So one of these may look familiar. If you look at the mode, it says normal for both of those. If you remember like Photoshop, you can switch your mode to like multiply or plus or overlay or any of those types of things. So that's exactly what this is, just like Photoshop allows you to pick which one. We're going to go to the next one, which is the track mat. And what this is going to do is basically look at where the top one is visible, and then that's what I want the bottom one to be invisible. Okay? So let me detour a second so you can see how this works. So I'm going to go here. There's a shape. Perfect. And it's a perfect circle, so that. All right, so let's say that I wanted to cut a shape out of here. If I duplicated this and I go down to this track mat here and I tell it there's 4 options. One of them is alpha mat, alpha inverted, luma mat, and luma inverted. So based on just your vocabulary, what do you think luma is? Light, right? So the brightness of this layer will control the transparency of the other layer, okay? The alpha is the transparency of the actual layer. So right here, if I click on my transparent grid, do you see how there's this transparent grid all the way around it? So this is completely solid right here. There it's transparent. So it would actually read the transparency from one layer to another, okay? So one of them will say, okay, whatever yours is, I want mine to equal the same thing. Or whatever yours is, I want mine to equal the opposite, right? So if I do alpha mat, it's basically going to take this layer here and make it only exist where that layer exists, okay? So if I take this one and I move it, you can see how it's like a clipping mask. It's just showing us that one part of it, okay? Now if I do the opposite, alpha inverted, it does the opposite of that. So where it exists, this one is just invisible. Okay? Now that's different than me just making a black circle here because it's actually transparent. And what that means is that if I put it on top of another layer, then I'll be able to see through that other layer so that it doesn't look like a big black circle and this purple circle on top of it. Okay? So this is a very important concept for us to understand because eventually we'll get into more and more of this. The LumaMat one, like we said, is brightness. So because this has varying brightness values, you'll see that we have varying levels of transparency here. Okay? And then obviously the inverted is the opposite of that. Okay? It's subtle, but you can kind of see it right there. Okay? As we go along, each of these will play an important part in how we do this. So on Circle Blip, if I set this to Alpha Matte, it's going to say wherever this layer exists, that one also exists. Okay? I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to do Alpha Inverted so that wherever this layer exists, this layer does not exist. Okay? So what that should give us is this. Okay? So it should like come up and then like disappear. And that's what it's doing. Now you'll see that we have just a hair of a feathering right here. Just based on how pixels work and everything else, they're overlapping each other perfectly and they're kind of fighting for that edge space, and so that's what happens. If I go to this top layer and I give it a 2 pixel feather or increase, then that doesn't happen. Okay? So now I go bloop. Okay? So take your bottom layer, where did my thing go? Take your bottom layer and set it to Alpha Inverted. Go to your top layer and give it 2 more pixels on its stroke. Okay? So this is basically one element. Now what we want to do with this is it's, you know, it makes no sense as to what it is right now because it's just like that. So we have to give it some more context, we have to give it a little more design for it to actually be something a little bit more complete. So this is my circle blip. So I'm going to make another new composition. And this one, 3 seconds is perfect. I will hit bubbles as the name and hit OK. And as I go along, I really need to start throwing all my compositions into my composition folder so that doesn't get too messy. Okay, so what I want to do now is I've created a composition over here called Circle Blips, and I have this bubbles composition. What I want to do is I want to grab the circle blip and drop it into that bubble composition. Okay? So under my comps, because I've labeled things correctly, my circle blip is the one that is the thing we just created. So I want to drag that into bubbles. Okay, so drag from your compositions up here, find that last comp you did, and drag it into that area. If you forget the name of it, you have tabs here that you should be able to find the name of that specific one. Okay, so now we have just this little blip right there. So again, it looks very similar to what we just saw. Now what I want to do is I want to duplicate, move, scale these kinds of things and offset their time. So watch mine and then you can do that to yours. So I already know what I'm going to do with this, so I'm going to duplicate it, I'm going to scale it, I'm going to scoot it over here. Then I'm going to duplicate it again, I'm going to scale it, I'm going to move it over here. Now just so I can see it all happen at once, I'm going to kind of line these up so that my time slider allows me to see each one of these. Okay, so maybe that one's too big. Maybe a little smaller in this one. That's good. Okay, now I know this is going to go the entire height of the composition, so I want to, you know, be appropriate with how far I take these things. Okay, so you could have 1 million of them. You could have 6 of them if you wanted. All right, so let's say that. Now I'm going to go through and just offset them. So this is my very first one. That's my main one. I don't touch it. Number 8, I scoot over. Number 7, 6, 5. I'm offsetting each one kind of randomly. No specific direction as to where each one is. I think I went too far, though, with those because my animation is pretty short, so I can't go like way down here. So this is what we get. right? So we get this little like bubbly kind of effect. Now these are coming in way too late, right? That makes no sense for them to even be there. So I need to pull this so that these happen a bit sooner. And I think I need to even scale them down even more. Like they're way too big. Let's try that again. It's better. And I think I probably made too many of these. Let me grab every other one and delete it. Let me offset some of these. It's weird how that worked out. You'll go here. You'll go there. Oops. There we go. Okay, so now duplicate them, offset them, scale them down. All right, now we're going to use these for one of our page transitions, okay? So the nice thing about it is it's pretty subtle. It's not like in your face, like crazy stuff. It's just something that'll just add a nice little feature, okay? So guess what we're going to make now? Another composition, right? This will be called Blip Transition. 3 seconds is our duration, 30 is our frame rate, 960 by 540. And we hit OK. Right? So now what we need to do is we're going to do that transition. This, to use the bubbles, it has to have something that matches what we're doing, okay? So we're going to have a very impactful kind of like slam down on our scene, and when it slams down, the bubbles are going to come up, okay? That's what we're going to be doing. And then it'll just go across. So the animation will be a solid that just comes down, boom, bubbles come up, and then it goes over, okay, and scales. So we're going to make a rectangle here, and you can double click it, and it fills the whole screen. And we don't need a stroke. And then we can just scale this in. Okay, so I just hit S to get to my scale. I uncheck the link, and then I'm just scaling it to like 20 looks like a good number. Okay, so we just want this bar basically in the middle. Don't worry about colors right now. As long as you can see it, you should be good. All right, so I'm just going to animate this thing from way up top, slamming down. And then I'm going to easy ease it. And because my bubbles, I want a hard impact, the speed is going to be on the end of it. Okay, so I want all the speed to be on that right side. So I can go to my composition. I know the bubbles is the composition that had the little bubbles in it that I wanted. So I'm just going to bring the bubbles down and then just line them up so that they appear. You typically don't want them to appear right when it hits. You want it to be like the layer should be a little bit before. You'll find a good spot. You'll just see, like it works here or it doesn't work here. That seems to work there. All right, now the last little part of this is that we're just going to scale this little piece outward, okay? So, oops, that's no huge deal. We just go to the scale for that shape layer. We want to get a good sense for how this animation happens. So what I don't want to do is I don't want the animation to come down and the bubbles happen and then we're scaling at the same time, right? It should be kind of like we talked about before, like there's a beat or a rhythm to our animation, same kind of thing that we want happening here. So boom, bubbles, and then the scale starts to happen. So I go to scale, I scoot up a little bit, and then I scale this out, and then I do my stuffs. Easy ease. There we go. Yep. And then remember, we have to animate it going off as well. So animate it somehow going off. If you look at mine, it scales, it holds for a second, and then it just falls off. Also look at this. I turned on motion blur for both layers. I turn motion blur on here. Are the bubbles motion blurring? No, they're not. Okay. In that other comp, they are motion blurring. Now, if I were to check this box here, sometimes that allows it to motion blur. In this case, it's not. Basically, what I need to do is go back to my bubbles in the very, very original one. So my original one where I made just the one bubble, that's the one that has to have the blur. Now, I may not want the blur. I just want to see what it looks like. Yeah, I'm satisfied with the blur. That looks good. All right, so that's how I animated mine going out. Obviously, you could animate yours going out however you want. So now we've gone through several different iterations, going back from, when we started last class, we did that. So let's get into close InDesign. So let's get into the assignment submission form, and then you can see what the actual assignment is. And then if you get time over the weekend, you can work on it. If you get a chance to come into lab, you can work on that as well. Okay. So all the ones we did as a group are not submissible. You have to create your own. Okay. No. Correct. So we can use it for other stuff. Could use it for other stuff. So like if we did when we do our Angry Birds, let's say, we have, someone does a water scene. Their guy hits the water, goes underwater. You can use this as little bubbles going up too. So these can be, right now they're static. You can animate them and bubble them. So you can do that as well. Assignment submission form. All right. What class are we in? Test title sequence. There we go. This one is PageTransitions. All right. Project name is PageTransitions. Our due date is January 31st. You will have next class to work on these. I'll show some more stuff just so you can get ideas, examples, that kind of thing. But I will not do a let's step-by-step this, because at this point, you should be able to say, okay, we're animating rotation, scale, and position. I can do something like that too, okay? Basically, any of the ones except for the super-duper 3D ones that you saw on YouTube, you should be able to look at those and say, I get how they're doing them, okay? It may not be the first time or the second time you do it, but eventually you'll get it the more you do. Like I said, by the time you get done with this assignment, you should be able to whip out page transitions like no big deal, okay? So our project description is we are going to build transitions to use between pieces. Oh, I think I know what you meant. I said we're going to use these transitions as the ones we use for the assignment on our other things. So not these specifically we created together, but the ones you create as your 5 will be used. That's what I was saying. Between pieces, yes. Okay. So our learning objectives, we're going to have several things that are going to be the same. Number 1, staying organized. Number 2, create keyframes. Number 3, we'll be using ease. I'll put easy ease. And graph editor, the GARF editor. There we go. Okay, now the specific ones to what we're doing here is you'll be making 5 unique transitions that animate from nothing to something, and then nothing again. Okay, so what I mean by that is that each one of these transitions, your screen is completely black. Something happens on the screen that fills the entire screen, and then it goes away. Okay, somehow it goes away. This is not a transition. Well, let me go here. This is an actual recreation of a transition turned in. There we go. Oop. That's not a transition, okay? Even if I duplicated it 100 times and I change the color for every 101 and you spent 7 hours on it, I don't care. That's not a transition, okay? It has to be something that fills the entire screen because we're going from one piece that might be bright green to another piece that might be dark blue. And we want to make sure that we don't have some weird hiccup in there that causes any issues, okay? So from nothing to something and then back to nothing. I want to see the use of compositions and pre-compositions, meaning that you just have compositions inside compositions. And then I want to see a variety of colors and methods. Okay, and what I mean by that is that if you do one circle one, I don't want 5 circle ones, but you're changing the direction on each one of the circle ones, or you're doing the same kind of thing over and over again. I want unique variety of things. I want things that are interesting, okay? So that should be it for our learning objectives. We are doing no planning for this one, so we can ignore that. For your project folder, you'll be turning in, and your everything will be turning in. And then we will have a movie for page transitions with title bumper at beginning. And I will show how to do that on Wednesday of next week so that we can see how to do that. And what's our resolution? 960 by 540. Yep, 960 by 540 at how many frames a second? 30 frames per second. Excellent. And then our class number and name, MACA 1900, Introduction to Motion Graphics. Oops. And take a minute right now and put your name on it. I already had 2 pages turned in from Monday that somebody did not name, not from this class, but another one. Cool questions on that? No. Oh, how many points possible? It's a good question. And this one is 1900. 3 points possible. There we go. So if you get to the point where you're like, you know, I'm not understanding this, or you know, I'm not moving as quickly as I think I should or want to, the only way that it's going to get better is by coming to labs and working on it, or working on it at home, spending hours and hours and hours doing it. That's the only way that this gets quicker and